Hello, Cleveland, and welcome back to another edition of the Dogland Podcast. I am your host, Jackson McCurry. And as we start the defensive side of the ball, the off-season roster deep dive, I can't talk, obviously. I'm joined as always for this by Jack Duffin of the Dogland.com. Jack, how are you, buddy?
It's good. It's exciting to chat about the defense because it's a lot better than it was last couple of years. Last couple of years, we were like, hey, who knows what's going to happen? But we've now got some pieces in the defense, not so much on the defensive line, which obviously is this week, but we've got some pieces built around where we're talking about tweaking it. Obviously, when we start on the defensive line, it's miles and nothing. But for the rest of the shows, we've actually got some real structure coming in there. So there is nothing under contract other than Myles Garrett worthwhile of anything.
Right, and that's unfortunate. And it seems like that's how it's been the last couple off seasons when we talked about the edge class, or edge defenders. But before we get to that, Jack, we had some Sashi Brown news last week, at the end of last week. We heard that he was leaving Monumental Sports, which owns the Washington Wizards, the Washington Mystics of the WNBA. They said for another opportunity. Then within that hour, we got word that Sashi's back in the NFL. And we even teased at the thought maybe he's coming back to stick it to Hugh Jackson one more time. But lo and behold, Sashi Brown is the president of the Baltimore Ravens, which we could have foreseen being in the Maryland area. But, man, it kind of hurts seeing Sashi now on the with the one of our arch rivals. He's with the original Browns. He's not with the current Browns, but good for Sashi to get back in the league. He's a bright dude. He dipped his toe in the basketball world, but it's obviously football is his first love, and that's why he's returned to the NFL.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute arms race between the Browns and the Ravens. They are the two smartest teams, and I don't think anyone would question that. And that's not just us on the outside. If you look at the annual poll that ESPN does, it's always the Browns and the Ravens that lead that, just based on where teams rank, how analytical, not just the front office, but all the staff and the people working within the team are. And no, it's one where we lose Kwesi and they gain Sashi. So they're in a really nice position. Obviously, he's not completely hands-on with football side. He's the president. But hey, I'd rather have a president as Sashi Brown than some like old crusty 70-year-old that is not going to be on the forefront of analytics and the way smart decisions are made. So no, I think it's a really, really smart move for them. And it's just great to see him back. And if you've got any bugbear of why he's not within the team, there's two people you should look at. One is Hugh Jackson and the other is Jimmy Haslam. Those are the only two people you can legitimately blame, because Haslam, if he hires Sean McDermott, it's a good chance Sashi is still the GM of this team. And if Hugh doesn't do such a horrendous job, there's still a chance he's GM of the team. So, if you're unhappy with it, go moan at one of them two. It's not Sashi's fault. It's a phenomenal opportunity. And, there's a good chance he's there for about 30 years.
Yeah, without question. And even if, say, the Browns hired Sean McDermott, there's a good chance Sashi Brown's the president of the Cleveland Browns. And they already had elevated Andrew Berry to GM, and, Dee Podesta's still in his role. Like, there's a bunch of what ifs. And of course, Hugh Jackson and Jimmy Haslam both in the headlines this week. We're not even going to comment on it because Hugh Jackson continued to be Hugh Jackson, and Jimmy Haslam, dropped the mic and said, Hugh never takes responsibility for any of his mistakes. We all accepted our mistakes in that, and Hugh didn't. And it seemed like Hugh just wanted another moment in the spotlight. It's unfortunate that he had to use Brian Flores as that moment. I think Brian Flores is doing something very courageous, and hopefully it does work out for him in his lawsuit. He still might even be a head coach by the end of the week because he's a finalist for the Texans job. But good on Flores, bad on Hugh. I think that's all I got to say. Jack, do you have any comments on that?
Surely Josh McCown is a lock.
You would think, and that might even increase Brian Flores' chances of this lawsuit if a guy that's never been a coach outside of the high school level gets the head coaching gig over Flores, who obviously has accomplished what he did in Miami despite being offered money to tank. that's going to be a situation that's going to be ongoing. Roger Goodell's press conference this week is going to be fascinating during Super Bowl week. Can't wait for that. But yeah, that's going to be a big story this offseason among many others in the NFL. So looking forward to seeing how that shakes out. But let's get back to the offseason roster deep dive, Jack. We are talking about the edge defenders. And like we said, it's Myles Garrett and it's nothing else. There is nothing else behind him. You do have, the Joe Jacksons, the Porter Gustins, the Curtis Weavers of the world, but the cupboard is very bare.
Just to add some names.
Yeah, the cupboard is bare. And Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, I think last year we were saying pretty much the same thing. It's Myles Garrett and a bunch of unknown heading into the offseason.
Yeah, so if we go back to last year, they were probably really looking to tie up Vernon maybe for 1 or 2 more years, and then unfortunately he went and got hurt. And I think if he wasn't hurt, then the Myles Garrett situation probably doesn't happen. Not the Myles, the Clowney situation probably doesn't happen because they keep him around on sort of, I'd said 1 year, 8 million, 2 years, 15, just something to keep him in the building and keep going. But yeah, in terms of Myles, they've got him. He's 100% locked in for the next 2 years. And then the team's got 3 option years on him. So a really, really strong position where if who knows what could happen in the NFL with injuries and everything else, they've got the opportunity to move on. But I think it'll end up actually being used as leverage to tie him into a third deal. So don't be surprised at that. If in 3 years' time, we're actually looking at 2 years left on Myles' deal, let's tie him up again and extend him. Because why not? If you then, rather than allowing him to play out those final 2 years, you tie him in for 3 more years guaranteed, and then you layer your option years on the back of it, give yourself some more cap flexibility. So I would guess that's the blueprint with Myles. But the issue that comes with Myles, you can't really have a second edge on a massive veteran deal next to him. It's come up again of, what if they'd have drafted Watt instead of Njoku? If they'd have drafted JJ Watt, there's TJ Watt, there's a good chance TJ Watt doesn't get extended and actually gets traded, because to tie up 2 edges on 50
pretty
million maybe.
Said, 55 million.
It would just completely derail your team because there would be no secondary.
Right. It would be, I know there's the revisionist 2017 draft being floated around where, the Browns take, Myles and TJ Watt, but yeah, like you said, it never would have happened. We probably would have ended up trading TJ, or we could have theoretically traded Myles. We would have traded TJ because Myles is the better player when you dive into the metrics. But yeah, there's no way that would have ever happened where we had 2 of those 2 studs like that. But it's good in theory to think about.
I could have seen that happening, but it wouldn't have stayed long term. They'd have enjoyed the rookie years and they'd have moved him. So yeah, hey, you get 2 first-round picks back for him. So why not? If you find the guy that's there, let's say they draft in the next 2 years, they get 2 absolute studs. We could be talking at the end of that Myles deal. They actually go, hey, we're going to trade Myles off. We drafted, say, a guy in the first round this year, and then next year we draft a guy in the 3rd round, and they both turn up to be both top 10 edges. You're not going to sit there at the end of their rookie deal in 3 years' time and go, should we get rid of these guys? You're going to go, actually, you're 30 years old, roughly, Myles. Now's the time you trade him in and you really reap that benefit, and you end up with 2 studs who you keep around. So those things, who knows what's going to happen? You don't know if you find some absolute superstar in the 3rd round. You just got to keep taking punts and deal with the problem on the back end. If you're sat there going, which one are we going to trade for 2 first-round picks? It's a nice position.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it ever came to that, it would be a crazy scenario. And I'm sure a lot of Browns fans would be like, no, we have to keep Myles at all costs. But it is something to think about if it ever led to that scenario that you suggested. As we look at edge 2, right now, we don't have one because Jadeveon Clowney is a unrestricted free agent. He will be in March. There is, from both sides, the Browns want to keep him. Clowney says he wants to stay in Cleveland. He also said he wants to get paid. The last couple of years, he's bet on himself on 1-year contracts, whether it was with, staying in Seattle, going to Tennessee, going to Cleveland. Maybe Clowney this year finally gets that multi-year deal. This also could be his last chance to get a big contract. He was good, but when you look at the PFF numbers, he was 51st out of 109 edge defenders last year. I wouldn't mind bringing him back on another 1-year deal. I don't see them working on a multi-year deal for him. It could be, but Jack, Clowney was good, but the Browns might think they can do better elsewhere.
Yeah, so everything we've seen from Clowney over three years of free agency is he's never seems to be in any hurry to sign a deal. So we're expecting him to go into free agency and have a look around and see who's offering the most money. And we expect it to come down to who's going to pay the most money. So those are two things. And obviously, Clowney could have an epiphany this season and change the way he wants to act. But what you would expect that to be is that's the way it works out. You then have to sit there and go, well, is that a game the Browns want to get involved in? He was on 8 million this year, and hey, he was fine for 8 million. You're probably looking at a market of 15 because the box score stats were really good. He got sacks and stuff, especially in the first half of the year. But then it dried up in the second half. But the sort of regular pressure and stuff throughout, lots of it's on Miles doing Miles stuff rather than Clowney being the freak of nature. And he has those physical gifts. Else he wouldn't have been drafted that high. So I think they'd struggle to bring him back. PFF Brad is looking at 1 year, 15 million. I think that's too rich for the Browns. And if someone is willing to give him that money, then I think it's time to say, hey, by all means, you pay that guy and allow him to go test the market and go find it. And if someone's offering multi-year deals, if someone's offering, say, 50, 60 over 3 years, I just can't see the Browns getting involved in that sweepstake, because if you do that, all of your money is tied up in there. Then there's going to be nothing in the defensive tackle room. There's going to be nothing added to the secondary. And linebackers going to stay cheap. Obviously, it's worked for the Rams. You can't take that away from them. They have a very weird star-heavy defense, but it is not consistent. One of those dudes goes down. If you pay all the money to 3 or 4 players and one goes down, you're in a really, really weak position. So I think it's tough.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be tough. Theoretically, they could cut Landry and then use that money, that 16 million on a 1-year deal for Clowney. I doubt they do that. That's why I think, if they can't get him into the number that they want, I think they go look in free agency, try to get a guy on a 1-year deal that's relatively affordable for what they want to do, and then go and draft someone. So, Jack, when you look at the free agency crop, you got Chandler Jones and Von Miller, who are ranked ahead of Clowney among the edge defenders. They're going to be out of the Browns' price range. I expect both of them to make. PFF has them making close to 17 million per year, both of them. I doubt they even look at Cleveland as a serious contender. We know Von Miller won't, because Odell Beckham told him last year to not come to Cleveland if he had the opportunity. Randy Gregory is a possibility. He's had his trials and tribulations over the years off the field. Do the Browns take a chance on him? They have with guys in the past like Kareem Hunt and Malik McDowell. Former Brown Emmanuel Ogbah is an option, but PFF has him projected at 15.5 million. So if the Browns go out and get somebody in free agency, it's probably going to be a guy like Clowney was a year ago, maybe in that 8 to 10 million range on a 1-year deal.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where you're looking for sort of the price range. And it's a really good selling point of going, hey, come play opposite Myles Garrett and earn a load more money in a year's time. Because you'll use Clowney as the example, and players are smart enough that they'll be able to know, hey, if I'm an edge and I play opposite Myles, I'm going to look really, really good. So yeah, Randy Gregory, Melvin Ingram, Hassan Reddick, Justin Houston, Jerry Hughes, Charles Harris, and Chenna Nwosu, or even the wild card I don't think they're bringing back to start, but I could see him, and we'll touch on him later, is Olivier Vernon, just because they're going to have more health knowledge on him than anyone else. But the one that I really liked, and as the playoffs was going on, I had Ian messaging me saying, well, he keeps playing well, so your hopes are going up in smoke here, was Melvin Ingram. I really wanted to make a move there, but that looks less and less likely. I think it might be a case of they're happy to wait a little bit. If you're looking at sort of 5-6 of these guys, that they let the market come to them. I don't think they're going to panic buy. So on the first day of free agency, I'd probably rule that out. Allow the free agency market to come to them, and then that day 2, day 3 of free agency, when the prices become a little bit better, that's when I expect them to strike.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a shame, Jack, looking at this free agency list. We have a guy, Emmanuel Ogba, who is with the Browns, who's going to get paid this offseason. And then another guy that could have been a Brown in 2018, Harold Landry, who's also expected to get a big payday this offseason. Two guys that theoretically still could be Cleveland Browns to a degree are going to go out and get paid when they could have been here opposite Myles Garrett wreaking havoc.
Yeah, Emmanuel Ogba has done really, really well. He's that prototypical. If you were drafting Emmanuel Ogba to go and play opposite Myles, that's the sort of pick where you go, that's a really good pick, where if you have him on the cheap and he just does what he does, that's great. He's not a flashy player, but he just does a job. Harold Landry as well. Emmanuel Ogba's obviously been better and produced better than Harold Landry, but yeah, and Randy Gregory might be a punt, just because you just don't know how teams are going to value him. Dallas have obviously got a lot of cap issues. That could be somewhere where the Browns strike.
Yeah, this could be a guy that, teams might not want to give a multi-year deal to. This could be a one-year deal scenario. And if he performs well, then the Browns if he comes in, say the Browns sign him to a one-year deal, 8 to 10 million, with the cap going up. If he performs well, theoretically, maybe they give him a multi-year deal. If he, plays good soldier, is good in and out of the building and around Cleveland, could be what's the word I'm looking for? Low risk, high reward too. I mean, it could be theoretically that, but I think they sign somebody like a Justin Houston, a Jerry Hughes, a veteran that is, looking to contend. And then they go out and find somebody in the draft. And when you look at the draft, there is some names out there, David Ajabo. There's a guy from Minnesota that balled out at the Senior Bowl this week that a lot of guys were looking at in the second round. Daniel Jeremiah saying he could go in the first round now. Does he go all the way to 13? Probably not. But like outside of Hutchinson and Thibodeau, like the edge class isn't very strong. But, in 2 months from now, Jack, we could be saying there's 5 or 6 guys among the edge defenders that could go first round. So the draft process is very fluid, which I'm sure we'll get into more as we get closer to the draft.
With the way the Browns work, and it's the way all smart teams work, is you fill your needs via free agency, and then you go and chase the most upside and benefit and talent in the draft. So I can't see them putting themselves in the position where they don't really address the opposite Myles in free agency. And that's why I think it will be could be a 2-year deal if you're looking around that 8 to 10 million range, not if you're looking more than that. And then they put themselves in a position when if someone's there at 13 they like as an edge, they go, boom, let's get in there. I think they will draft. I think you're probably looking at rounds 1 or 2. It might be round 3. But I think really early we're going to see an edge come off the board for the Browns. It's more a case of who and where rather than if. But I would expect them to use that person as a 3 going into the season and then transition through as they develop, because it sets you up really nicely. You need a solid rotation there. If you've got 3 really good guys, hey, you just use 2/3 for everyone, and then some inside snaps to mix it in as well. But that is where they'd want to go. So I think they will draft someone, but they won't leave themselves in a position where they have to draft someone, because who knows who could fall to 13, or someone calls us up and goes, hey, we'll give you a first round pick and our second for your pick. They're probably going to say yes. And then they don't want to be in a position where they're like, oh, but we need this player. If you're going to drop partway down, and hey, you could drop all the way to like late 20s, and someone gives you their first this year, their first next year, they are going to take that probably all day long.
Oh, without question. If we look at the rotational edge defender, the last couple of years, the Browns have spent this on veterans or reclamation projects, as whether it was Adrian Claiborne a couple years ago, Tack McKinley last year, who was effective until his Achilles injury, which is unfortunate because he was probably looking at a multi-year contract in free agency. Maybe not a big bucks one, but maybe like a 2-year deal. So now the Browns come into free agency. They could go back to an old familiar face in this role, Jack, and you mentioned him, Olivier Vernon, who suffered the Achilles injury at the end of 2020. Last thing I heard from him, and this was on a Twitch stream during the Raiders game with our buddies Jake Burns and Stephen Thomas, that Vernon still wasn't close. But who knows, by April or May, when OTAs happen, he could be ready then. This could be a shot where the Browns give him a 1-year deal where he tries to get back on the field, maybe get one more shot at a decent contract if he has a bounce back year. But if the Browns are looking for a rotational edge in the veteran spot, Olivier Vernon could make the most sense because he's familiar with the scheme and the Browns are familiar with him.
Yeah, it could be one where they just give him a really sort of cheap deal and then load it up with incentives. It could easily be one where, hey, we're actually going to pay you $2 million. And then we're just going to throw incentives in there that you can get all the way to 8. Because when you start talking about, hey, we'll do $1 million for the Super Bowl, we'll do $500,000 if we make X the AFC Championship game. Obviously, those incentives, hey, if you get there, who cares that you're paying an extra $1 million for your third edge? So they could look to load it up with loads of really crazy stuff and push it. So yeah, I would keep a real eye on that. And it just gives them some security. And if it doesn't work out and he can't play, then who cares? You've wasted nothing, because the way they'll structure the deal, they might give him like $250,000 in sort of signing bonus or something. So I think it just makes a lot of sense. But if not, there might be some other guy that just completely falls through the cracks, and they're just throwing like $2.5-3 million at to go, hey, be our number 3. And unless they are sort of like, hey, we're definitely going to draft someone. We know where our strength's at. Even if it's sort of the 3rd round, we will get someone. So don't worry about, in the past, having Miles free agent. They could easily go that route. And I think that's the most likely route, that they'll actually draft their edge 3 this year. But they could want a free agent just to be safe.
They could always bring Tack back depending on how his recovery goes. He's only 26. I mean, this could be a 1-year deal worth like $2, $3, $4 million. If he's good to go and his recovery is good, the Browns could look to bring him back, use him as an edge 3 or edge 4.
Yeah, I just don't know what his timeline is. I think it will be grim. So it might be one where, if they don't draft someone, that Tack is the backup plan, and they've had that conversation, because they'll have the best idea of any team of when he's likely to be back. So it could be a case of, hey, you're going to miss the first month. We'll work out a plan for the first month. You're our backup plan. Hey, they're probably chatting to Vernon and Tack on that front already. And then, hey, and if it doesn't work out, then he'll get a team. But I just don't know what that time frame is.
Right. I mean, the Achilles injury is so weird because, like, Vernon, even he's an older vet. I mean, he still wasn't ready a year after. But then you have, the Rams running back Cam Akers, crazy story with his Achilles injury, and he was back already for the playoffs after it was like 4 or 5 months. So the Achilles injury is so weird, but they've come a long way. Obviously with modern medical science, just some of these injuries you don't think they could come back from. And then, well, behold, Cam Akers is now the exception. So everybody's kind of has a different look at the Achilles injury. And then, edge 4, it could be a UDFA guy. It could be a really cheap free agent. They may bring back a Joe Jackson or a Curtis Weaver, like we mentioned earlier, or a Porter Gustin. Who knows? They might even draft another edge if they draft one early, because they have that extra 3rd-round pick now from Kwesi getting hired as the Vikings GM. So who knows what they do at edge 4? Obviously, a lot of unknown at this position.
Yeah, it's one where I don't think Joe Jackson or Curtis Weaver is going to make the roster. I think they're battling for practice squad spots. Then you look at potentially, I like the idea of double dipping. If they feel really good about the top two, say it's Miles and Melvin Ingram, just for example, they have sort of phone conversations with Vernon and Tack and go, hey, if something happens, we're going to give you a call. But you just keep us up to date with your timeline. Our doctors are on hand. They'll help out. Then you've got Joe Jackson and Curtis Weaver that you don't really rate, but if they had to step in as a 4, it's not the end of the world why you wait a month for Tack to come back. And then you draft a guy in the 1st or 2nd round, and you draft a guy at potentially the end of the 3rd with your 2nd pick there, or 4, 5, 6, 7. Why not draft someone? Draft 2 guys, and that gives you sort of a lot more upside. If you've got Miles and a backup, and then you draft 2 guys, say in the 1st and the 4th, you're in a nice position that one of those guys should be able to step up. You would expect it to be the guy that you draft in the 2nd, but you just never know. The guy that you draft in the 4th might be better. And if not, you could be sat there next year going, look, neither of these guys are superstars, but they're solid average edges. We've got both of them. And then let's add that sort of 5 million, your steady vet. And we've got a really, really deep rotation of 4 guys. But you don't feel the need to go, hey, we need to spend 10 million again on some edge 2. So, no, I like the idea of one free agent, keep these other guys on the back burner, and drafting 2.
Yeah, that's a very good scenario. And it's a very good outcome, I think, for the Browns if they go that route. As we wrap this episode up, just want to mention, you guys can go back and listen to our episodes as we covered the offensive side through the Dogland Podcast archive. Also go to the dogland.com to check out the articles. We'll be back Wednesday to cover the interior of the defensive line, the defensive tackle room. Jack, let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, it's my Twitter's at Jack Duffin, DUFFIN. DMs are open. Fire me your questions. Keep that feedback coming. I'm thinking we'll have a lot more shorter articles next year. So if that's where your mind's at, let me know, because it helps me structure them for where we're going to go.
And you guys can follow me on Twitter at JackMcCurry08, as well as the Dogland at the Dogland. And you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. So until next time, Browns fans, as always, go Browns.
Go Browns.